Everybody, we're here with Philip Gelatt, and he has a new series, a docu-series that he is directing that's coming out very soon called First Word on Horror. And Philip, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. So tell me about the First Word on Horror.
So, First Word on Horror is a documentary series about horror writers. It features five of what we call the top writers of horror working today. They are, let me put them in order: Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, Elizabeth Hand, Laird Barron, and Mariana Enriquez.
Okay.
And we've interviewed each of them about their lives, about their work, about their processes, and then had each of them read one of their short stories. And then we intercut the interview with the short story to create a sort of blending of fact and fiction and ask questions about human creativity and the horror genre in general.
It sounds like an amazing concept for creatives and kind of looking under the hood at where all these nightmares come from. I was able to catch the first episode with Stephen Graham Jones, and I really enjoyed his essay on Final Girls.
Mhm.
That was phenomenal. But is there one from the this first season that particularly uh, got to you? I know that they're all wonderful, but is there one that really sticks with you?
Oh, that's such an unfair question. I mean, they all stick with me in their own ways. I would say that Paul Tremblay's episode. So Paul, if you don't know, he's a writer of horror. He wrote the book on which M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin is based.
Right.
And I've known Paul for a while, and when I approached him to be interviewed, he knew all the other authors I was interviewing, and each of them has a pretty wild life story. So Stephen Graham Jones grew up rough in
Yeah.
Texas, West Texas. Elizabeth Hand has her own sort of harrowing tales of an assault she suffered, among other things. Laird Barron grew up rough in Alaska and rode the Iditarod dog sled, race. Mariana grew up under a dictatorship, and then there's Paul. Paul just grew up in suburban Massachusetts and has no particular, harrowing stories from his youth. Um, so when I asked him to be in the show, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to be the boring one, aren't I?" And I was like, "No,
Oh,
no, 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 Paul, you're not going to be the boring one. You're going to give a great interview, and it's going to be great." And so I'm singling him out as the one that sticks out because I do actually think his episode is fantastic. And despite the fact that he doesn't have these insane stories, personal stories, the fact that he doesn't, and the fact that he's so thoughtful on the genre and on process and on honestly just sort of like living in the modern world, I think it makes that one stand out all the more. So Paul's the
again,
one I'm
I'm
thinking.
all of them I bet are like noteworthy in some way. I just was like, is there something that pops out? Now, as I was watching the first episode, I was like wondering who decides what's talked about. Do you give them a prompt, or do they kind of just develop something for you?
No, so I give them a list of what I'm going to ask them before each interview, and before I make that list of questions, I do a good bit of biographical research, so I know, like what to ask. And so usually I'm phrasing the question like, tell me something about growing up in, New York, or tell me something about growing up in West Texas, or tell me something about this. And then just letting them, start as specific or as broad as they want. And then I'll respond to those questions. Well, there's a little bit of back and forth to try to tease out if there's something else that I want to get from it. That's for the biographical part. And then there's always a set of questions that are about the writing process and the horror genre and, sort of like philosophy in a certain sense. And those questions are exactly the same for each author. So knowing that watching the series, you can kind of tell, like I ask each of them, like, are you in control of your characters or do they have minds of their own? And I ask them each like, do you believe in evil or like whatever? Like there are certain things that each of them answer. Just 'cause I thought it would be interesting to hear their different answers.
I loved Graham Jones' origin story, if you will.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know how
Hmm.
growing up, in West Texas, everybody had a gun, and he just sat there and wrote a story waiting for his relative,
Yep.
at the hospital. And then next thing you know, are there any other inspiring stories in the series that you could share?
Yeah. So n none of them are quite as intense as Stevens in terms of first stories, because that's really the tale of him writing his first story on in this
Mm.
notebook while his uncle, right, who has been burned so
Yeah,
badly.
yeah.
Um, uh, Laird tells a story about his first novel and how nobody's ever going to read it because it's so bad. And then has a really sort of inspirational story about the first story he wrote that got published and how that came to happen, almost, like not by luck, but almost like, fortune sort of shined on him, and it was unexpected. Um, and then uh, Mariana has her whole other journey. It's not quite like Steven. So that the way that Steven tells that particular story, it's not nobody has one that's quite like that one. But they each have their own little appeal.
Yeah, I'm sure I mean, creativity and inspiration comes from somewhere. And Paul's was suburbia.
Yeah,
You know,
yep, yep.
uh Stevens was, living in West Texas. But for you, what is horror for you, uh, Phil? What is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's so much. I mean, I think I love it as a genre because there are so many different flavors and different ways that you can engage with it, right? So, um, I mean, as a creative, so to speak, as a writer, as a filmmaker, I like it because it feels like a genre where there's a lot of freedom to be surreal and sort of closer to the human subconscious than there is in other types of genres. And I like that about it. And it makes it feel, you know, uh, like interesting and free, basically, even though you're still trying to scare a person, you're sort of using the language of nightmares and dreams, and I like that. As a consumer of horror, I mean, I like every subgenre of horror. So I like it's sort of hard for me to answer. Like I like the substance. I love that sort of like almost gross out humor of the substance. I also quite like Nosferatu, which is a much different breed of horror. I also liked Terrifier, which is maybe it's a whole other thing.
This
So I don't
whole,
know,
yeah,
yeah, a whole
yeah.
other thing. I'm kind of an equal opportunity consumer of the genre, so it's hard for me to put a finger on exactly what the appeal is for me, except that it's all of the above, I guess.
Just yes.
Yeah.
Um, we in the series you talk about the origin stories and the inspiration for all of these authors, but um, what inspired you to put this series together?
Yeah, so it started, I've always loved writers and been fascinated by writers and writers' personalities, but the first episode we shot was the Laird Barron episode, and we shot it because I knew Laird and I knew that he had crazy stories about being in Alaska as a kid. And then he got very sick a couple of years ago and almost died. And he recovered from that. And when he recovered, I was like, okay, well, now I need you to sit down and do this interview with me so that because I don't want you to just drop dead without me having put your stories on camera. So we started with that. And at that point, there was no series. It was just me wanting to do that. And so we just did it. And then my producer on the project, Will Battersby, saw how that was cutting together. And he was like, oh, this is really interesting. Why don't we turn this into a series? Why don't we expand it out and talk to other authors? So that's really how it started. And then we went out and gathered the group and yeah, turned it into what it is.
That's phenomenal. So, do you personally have a your own horror origin story? That you
So I don't, I was saying Paul considers himself to be the boring one, but I think the truth is it's really me. Because I also grew up suburban in Wisconsin. I have no harrowing tales of near death or burned relatives or anything. I just one day acquired a taste for it, and it hasn't gone away. So I have no
That's good
excuse,
though.
basically.
That's good too. That's a good thing.
Thank you, thank you.
So we need all of it. So, how can people watch this series?
Yes, so we are releasing the series on Substack, which, if people don't know, is a website that's sort of been for journalists and writers. But we're trying to release a series on there, so it should be pretty interesting. The Substack is etchstudio.substack.com. You can go there. The series starts next week, which is the first week in February. New episodes are every Friday.
Okay.
You can sign up on the Substack and we'll send you episodes. And yeah, that's where you can see it.
Is there like a subscription or is it free?
There's a subscription. You can subscribe for free, in which case you will get not the entirety of every episode, but a sizable chunk of every episode and various other little clips. Like if you go there now, we've released a whole series of clips that are bits cut out from the episodes. So we'll be doing that. Those will be available to everybody.
Cool.
If you subscribe, if you pay to subscribe, then you get the full episodes and a couple of other like little bells and whistles and bonuses. So it's a pretty good deal, free or paid. Either way, there'll be plenty for you to look at.
Super cool. So next Friday, uh,
Yes. Yep.
Friday it'll be the first episodes will be released. Episode rather. It comes out once a week, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So very good.
Yep. Fridays.
Everyone, Philip Gelatt, First Word on Horror. Go check it out on Substack. We'll put the little link in the description. And Philip, great to see you again. And thank you so much for talking to us about this show.
Yes. Thank you. This was awesome. Really
All
appreciate
right.
it.
Take care.